This is MJ. I'm an author, I'm an artist, I'm an analyzer. Find all my work at mjmunoz.com. Prepare yourself for some off-the-cuff book talk as I tackle another middle grade book chapter by chapter. Consulting with somebody about stuff lately, and I told him yesterday, if this book doesn't have me by like chapter 5, I'm just going to drop it because I'm not wasting my time, and I'm not going to spend 45 days, 9 weeks worth of time as far as release schedule is concerned on this book if I don't like it, if it's not good enough quality for me. So I was going to drop it, but then I listened a little bit more. I listened to this chapter this morning, and I thought, you know what? There's something here. There's something here, and I do like something that's going on, and that something isn't Amanda Beale, but it is personified by Amanda Beale, I could say, and that is that there's an actual story going on now. There's actual conflict. There's actual character. And I always go back to this, and I always say it like that, but I believe in the old adage that character reveals conflict, and I have to agree that that's absolutely true, that character does reveal conflict, or rather, it's conflict reveals character. That's what I meant to say. And the thing is that we haven't had Maniac Magee interacting with anybody other than yelling talk, talk, talk to his aunt and uncle, in chapter 1, I think. Yeah, because this is chapter 2, right? No, this is chapter 3. Because it's Maniac Magee chapter 3, which is setting me free and giving me a new perspective on it. Anyway, yeah, you had an introduction, you had one chapter, you had a second chapter, and in those 3 chapters, there was no real conflict, and there was no real opportunity for Jeffrey's character to be established. By the way, I also now know it's Jerry Spinelli and Jeffrey Lionel Magee. I've got that all straightened out now, I think. Anyway, so, yeah, now there's a conflict. Now there's something going on. Jeffrey is interacting with somebody, and before, again, other than talk, 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 why wouldn't you talk and running, there was no interaction that he had with anybody. So, while I like the performance, by Murkison, Murkison? I gotta look that up. Anyway, well, I like the performance, it can only do so much with what's there, and I believe it did elevate the content so far of the book, but here we're really getting something. And what we're getting is this conflict between Jeffrey and Amanda. And the conflict that they're getting, it's kind of multi-layered, and I'll cite like one thing from the chapter specifically, or one part of the interaction that happened with them specifically, and I'll expound on that because I don't want to go through the whole chapter. I can leave that kind of stuff for later. And it's probably the most significant part. He sees her suitcase. He stops running or stops jogging through the town when he sees her lugging a suitcase with her. He doesn't know where she's going. She's going to school. He doesn't know that. So he stops and says hi to her, and she says hi back because she's polite. She's nice. And he asks her, "Oh, are you running away too?" And she laughs, and she says, like, she laughs because it's absurd to her that she would be running away, which to me says a couple things. It means she has a good home life. It means she's happy with things as they are. And yeah, she has a good home life. She's happy with things as they are. Even though she's living in a town divided by racism. Because she's, in this interaction, it's mentioned or it's brought up, it's presented to the audience in her thoughts or whatever, that he's probably from West End where the whites are, and he doesn't belong in East End, she says to him, which is where the blacks are, and she doesn't understand what he's doing there. And, like, she's kind of suspicious of this, but that's what she's used to, and she's okay with living like that. So, that actually does some really interesting, very clever things. It shows that Jeffrey ran away, or it reinforces the fact that Jeffrey ran away from his terrible home life. And then you have here a girl who's similar to him in some ways. Like the connection, the book thing seems like a connection, which I'll get to that too, because I want to talk about that, the good and bad of it. But the idea that he ran away from home because it was so terrible, and he lived in a divided home, in a town that wasn't divided, let's say, is interesting because that's a direct foil or contrast to Amanda Beale, who lives in a whole home. I'm assuming from here, the fact that she hasn't run away, I'm just like, I'm partly assuming and partly projecting from what I know from reading books how things could go. So, the fact that she hasn't run away means she's either not fed up enough with things, because he stayed for 8 years in this horrible house of 2 toasters, and yet his town wasn't divided as far as we know. Yet her town is divided into East End and West End. 2 Mills is divided into East End and West End, but her home is probably whole, and that's why she's happy in the home, and that's why she's happy to keep going to school. Either that or she hasn't reached her breaking point yet. But I think in order to set up the contrast, we've got a homeless wanderer who runs from his home, his broken home, and then he finds himself lodged in a whole home within a divided town, and that'll be something that creates more of the conflict and helps set up the story. And I wouldn't be shocked if he goes over to West End and befriends some white kids over there, a white family, and then that's another thing where he's seeing another whole home in a broken city, in a broken town. That would be really interesting. But yeah, so her carrying the stuff, looking like a homeless wanderer like him, made a connection, and it was a cross-racial connection. He didn't see her as someone who's black, therefore he can't be similar to her. He saw her as somebody who's on the run from his family and from his home, like he is. So there's a connection right there. There's that like brotherhood, sisterhood type thing going on. Or there's that connection there. And that connection is what enables him, like he's an open person who's open to connection, probably because he has seen modeled for him disconnection and disharmony and discord in family, in, you know, supposedly loving, the most loving relationship there should be, husband and wife. And, you know, he's lost his mother and father too. And I still disagree with the way the first 2 or 3 chapters, like the intro and the 2 chapters, were put forth. However, they do supply a lot of the necessary background to understand all of this stuff, but they didn't have to do it in that way. And I feel confident, I feel comfortable saying I disagree with how it was presented, but also at the same time saying, on the other hand, I do like what's being put forward because you can see these connections. So he connects with her over this thing. She opens up the books. He's wowed. She's wowed. She ends up, after like some waffling back and forth, deciding to go and give him a book, and he tells her address. She tells him her address and says, but you can't go there to deliver the book back to me, which I predict he's going to go do that. And I'm predicting the reason he can't do that is because he's white, not black, and that'll cause tension and cause issues, because the black folk and white folk don't mix in Twin Mills. So, or that's what it seems like anyway. So, I think it's a really interesting setup. It's really compelling. Seeing the way that they react to each other is interesting. She says something about like his family or his mom and dad or whatever, and like starts walking off, and he falls back because he's like so shocked. Like he can't say my parents are dead. There's a meme. I'm gonna insert it right here. Okay. He can't say that. He can't say that right now. He can't acknowledge that hurtful truth, and it's a touching moment. It's a touching moment. We get to see him confronting the fact that his parents are dead, that he is an orphan, not just a runaway, but also an orphan. And his hesitation, that the fact that his hesitation slows him down when he's like said to be this boy who never stops running, basically, is really interesting. And it really textures his character, and it makes me more interested. It shows me a weakness or a flaw or a chink in his arm or whatever, that like, oh, this guy is affected by things, and that makes me like him more. And Amanda, like, laughing at the fact that he thinks she's a runaway, says a lot about her, like that's a preposterous idea. And then the fact that like she was never late to school except for that one day when she stayed to give him that book, like that also like says a lot about who she is, and like either she loves school or she is very disciplined at home, and there's a lot of rigidity and structure that says like you will go to school and you will succeed, which coming from like, I don't know if she's poor or not, but coming from like a black family in the South-ish area, I could see like a want and a desire to like be proud and like, look, we're, you know, like we're a proud family, not the proud family, we're a proud family, and we're going to live as such and like act with decorum and self-respect and like respect for the society in which we exist, and we're going to, you know, do our best because we can, and we are capable of doing our best, so we will do our best and be above reproach, be above you know, derision and scorn, and anybody who gives that to us is a weak person who is doing it because of their feelings and their insecurities, and it says nothing negative about us. It only says negative things about them. So, like, I can totally see that being the case. Reminds me of the Logan family from the Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. That was a good book. That was a really good book. So anyway, yeah. Speaking of books, when Magee was like shocked by these books, and again, I can't quite tell when this was. What is this? The 60s? Is it the 50s? Is it the 70s? Is it the 80s? Is it the 90s? I don't know. It's very unclear so far when it's set, and the level of media saturation that there would have been at the time would make it believable that books, a suitcase full of books, and would delight Jeffrey, and the fact that he tells her, any book, give me any book, I want any book, also speaks to the, like, low level of media saturation. There were only a few TV channels, not everybody had a TV, that kind of thing. Media was an event, and a book, like, still represented, like, an escape into another world. Makes me think that's interesting. At first I kind of groaned, and I thought, ugh, another book where books change the world. Or I was even contemplating, I'll let you in on a little secret. So, I'm an author, right? So I'm working on a book series right now that was going to be a kid gets sucked into a video game. That's been done too much. You know what? It hasn't, okay? There's millions of thriller books, millions of crime books, probably literally, if not just tens of thousands. There could be millions. Anyway, but at least there's hundreds of books in any one genre that tell, like, a certain type of story. But, like, what I'm going to bring to it is unique. And what I'm going to bring to it is so unique that this was a possibility. Somebody suggested to me, my secret counselor, my benefactress, is that how you would say that? Anyway, she advised to me, don't make this a book about video games. Make it a timeless book or book series, and make it about books. This kid is his family owns a bookstore, or they own a library or whatever, and that's how he gets sucked into this other world. And I thought, that's actually doable. The way I was going to do these video games is there's different worlds within this one location, and the kid goes from one to one to one and has adventures inside of each one, and whatever happens. And I thought, the way I'm structuring his family structure and like his internal journey and this, like, the otherworldliness of this other world. I'm not doing like a lit RPG. I'm doing like he's in another world with his game skills. And he can transfer those skills from thing to thing. I was thinking he could also just transfer that, because it's like he's actually inhabiting the hero character of that game, that narrative, though, right? That's my point. It's like video games can have a very powerful narrative, even if it's like subtle. Even like The Legend of Zelda can have a very powerful narrative with such a silent protagonist. Even Mario, to some extent, can have a pretty powerful narrative. Like, they've made movies out of both of those things, where it's not, it's a video game in this world. I keep getting phone calls while I'm recording stuff. Anyway, so the way I have it set up, I could have it either be he's going from video game to video game or book to book, and the internal journey is the same, because it's not lit RPG where there's, game rules and stuff flashing up on the screen in front of the character. I haven't read any lit RPG, so I wouldn't be interested in that. I watched an anime that was lit RPG, and that was really cool. Log Horizon, by the way. So I was thinking, part of me wanted to not do the books, even though my advisor told me to do the books, because I thought, I'm already a good way into developing this video game world and like how the fantasy works. And because it's a fantasy world, I could just transfer it and say it's a book instead. But something felt inauthentic to me about doing the books, switching to books, because like I've played video games and I've enjoyed them. And I think that there's a healthy balance that you can have, with, using those for entertainment and escape and catharsis. And I've also read books and, watched movies and things like that for the same purpose, basically. But video games do feel like more of a time suck, and they feel a little bit more like a waste of time than reading a book. Because despite the fact that the narrative is there's also the mechanics of the game that you're playing, and like those mechanics can draw you in, especially if it's like an RPG like I like to play, where like you're grinding and you're spending a lot of time doing stuff, and it's like if you're not actually doing anything. Where if you're reading a book and you're going through the narrative, like the narrative parts of the games are great, I think. And even if you could like turn that into a visual novel, or if you could do something else with it, like I just think video games are like there's more danger to playing video games than there, like playing a lot of video games. Playing 100 hours worth of video games is less good for you. It's less beneficial, I'll say it that way, than reading 100 hours worth of books. Because, again, I'll share a lot. My favorite video game franchise is probably the Persona series, which there's good things and bad things about it. But like as an adult, I felt comfortable, very comfortable playing with it. I wouldn't advise it to a kid. Although I did play the first one in like my last year in high school. I played my first Persona game, not the first one. I played Persona 3 and Persona 4 that year. And I easily put 100 hours into Persona 4. And that was to complete the game and all its stuff. And there's a lot of characters that you interact with, and a lot of character stories that you get to learn through these gameplay mechanics and everything. But like, had I read 100 hours worth of books instead, I think I could have benefited from that. Had there been a Persona 4 book series that took 100 hours to read through, I think that would have been even better than the video game in a lot of ways, as far as like what it did for me as a person. Because the like side story stuff told in the Persona games is really interesting. And it's really like deep and impactful and very humane and humanitarian, and I don't know, it sounds weird. And then you're going around slashing shadow monsters and stuff and blasting them with, various forms of magic and things like that. So, I really do, like, while I can appreciate a video game, I do think like it's something you should be more cautious with than you should be cautious with books. I also think a movie or television series, 100 hours worth of that is probably doing less for a person than reading like 100 hours worth of books. So with that being said, or even though I'm saying that, I still feel like for my story, the video games make sense for the context of the character. And I still kind of cringed at the idea of, I'm going to have this kid who's, part of a book family, even though like there's like 3 of us in the house who are pretty avid readers, I would say. Anyway, like having books save the world, or having this guy go through a journey through these books and that changes him as a person, like that makes more sense, but it's like less fun, and it feels like, oh, I'm an author, so I'm going to write about books. That's kind of not so great. I tried reading a comic book series where the guy wanted to be a writer, and part of it was supposed to be a superhero thing, and then part of it, the first like good chunk of it, which is why I dropped the series, among other things that came up later, was that like the guy wanted to be a writer, and he'd spent a couple years in LA not pursuing his career of being a writer, even though he wanted to be a writer. So he goes back home in shame to the Midwest or whatever, and he keeps trying to write there, and it's just like, what is this? Like, why? Why is it so important that this guy's a writer? And then stuff happens, he stops being the main character, yada, yada, yada. And it's, I don't know, it's like, it feels pretentious to have a writer writing about writing, and I don't like that. And it also feels pretentious to have a writer writing about books. So, that's my real core problem with this. So this felt like it was going to be pretentious, and I groaned at it at first. But honestly, Jerry Spinelli did a good job with it, and I think in the context of the time and place, books would be a big deal to these kids, and it would make sense. I mean, it could have been comic books, it could have been regular books, there were all sorts of books in there. She could have comic books in there, I don't know. But like, any form of escape, like, if it's Treasure Island, if it's Treasure Island, if it's Robin Hood, if it's, whatever, like, those things can transport a kid away from things. And I would think being homeless and just running, and we don't know what he did in that year where he was away, like, he would have had a lot of opportunity for boredom and downtime and loneliness. And I could see books filling the gap for him, not feeling it, filling it, and helping him to cope with that. And I think it's rather interesting. So anyway, I like this chapter. Please excuse my asides, but look at Chapter 0, or the introduction, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, how brief my talks on that were, and how like low energy I was talking about those, because they weren't exciting. They weren't interesting. This chapter is exciting. This chapter is interesting. There's something neat going on here. There's something I can sink my teeth into, and there's something I can say about this book. And unless it turns out to stink in a couple chapters, I'll keep going. And I'm probably, the other episodes won't be this long with me talking about it, but I had to get a lot off of my chest. I had to share a lot, because this book's put me in kind of a weird place, and it's been like, reading it and discussing it has been kind of weighing on me, and it's like giving me a lot to think about. And I typically, there's an adorable squirrel outside my window right now running around with a bunch of sparrows. It's so cute. Anyway, he popped up on his 2 legs, and I was like, And then he ran off. Anyway, he was smiling. That's what it is. I gestured and I didn't say what I was doing. So anyway, yeah, I hope that the rest of these won't be this long, because I feel like this has gone on like really, really long. Not that the book isn't turning out to be worthy of it, but it's a long thing for a single book discussion, for a single chapter discussion of a book. So anyway, I'm finding it interesting now that Jeffrey is in conflict or in contact with characters, and we're seeing some conflict, and it's revealing some of his character, and it's helping me to understand the world better. I like it a lot more. So maybe having the character exist and be talked about in a vacuum with no context, with context being given in this strange, slam poetry style, isn't for me. But an author who can do that, if he puts the characters in interaction with other characters, I can really like what they're doing. I can really like what they're saying. I can really hear the message. I can hear what he's trying to say. I can see what he's trying to put out and get across to me in his words, in his slick style and everything, when he abandons the style and goes for substance. And that I can sink into, and that I can think about, and that I can integrate into the way I'm perceiving my own world and the way I'm thinking about his book as well, I think, is what I'm saying. I hope you enjoyed that. Please remember to like, share, subscribe. I invite you to comment, ask questions, and share your thoughts with me. It's always more fun when you're part of the conversation. Until next time, keep reading, be well, and do good things. Visit mjmunoz.com for more of my work and help me build up the Fortress Fiction.